The threat came at 7:51 a.m. on a Monday in the parking garage of the 3rd District Station House on Oleander Avenue, 3 floors down from the office where, at that exact moment, the chief of police was signing the paperwork that would be announced at the press conference in 4 hours. The officer who made the threat was named Dukes. He was 43, 16 years on the force, thick through the neck, with the posture of a man who had held the same amount of space for so long he had stopped noticing he was doing it. He had come down to the garage for a reason he would later describe in his written statement as retrieving personal items from his vehicle, which was true in the way that things are true when they are accurate but not complete. What was complete was this. For 9 months, Dukes had been the officer assigned to 3rd floor administrative detail. A desk assignment, no patrol, the specific kind of lateral placement that the department gave to officers whose conduct had generated complaints, but not enough of the right kind of complaints to produce a termination. He had been placed there in February following an incident on Roanoke Street that produced 2 complaints and 1 formal grievance from the supervising sergeant on scene. The assignment had made him a man with too much time, too little movement, and a sustained private grievance about both. The man he threatened was standing beside a dark blue Ford Explorer in Bay 11 of the 3rd floor, in full dress uniform, holding a briefcase in his left hand and a travel mug of coffee in his right, checking his phone. He had parked in Bay 11 because it was the closest available space to the elevator, and he had a 9 a.m. briefing on the 4th floor that he wanted to arrive at 6 minutes early, not because 6 minutes was required, but because arriving early was the habit of a man who had been precise about his time for 31 years. Dukes said, "You're in my spot." The man in uniform looked up from his phone. He looked at the parking bay. He looked at Dukes. The bay had no name on it, no designation, no reserved sign. He said this. Dukes said he didn't need a sign. He said everyone on the 3rd floor knew it was his spot and had known for 7 years. He said whoever had assigned this man to this garage had made a mistake, and he suggested the man find somewhere else to park. And then he said 2 other things in a register that dropped below the level of a suggestion. Things that were about the uniform and the man wearing it and the man's relationship, in Dukes's view, to the space he was currently occupying, and those 2 other things had a shape that was not about parking at all. The man in uniform listened to all of it without moving. He held the briefcase in his left hand and the travel mug in his right and let Dukes finish, the way a person lets weather finish, and then he said, "I'll keep that in mind." He walked to the elevator. He pressed the button. He got in. Dukes watched the doors close. He stood in the garage for a moment, and then he went to retrieve whatever it was he had come down to retrieve, and the incident was, by his understanding, over. He did not know about the press conference. He did not know about the paperwork being signed on the 4th floor. And he did not know that the man who had just ridden the elevator up had been watching him the same way that man had watched everything for 31 years, carefully, completely, without letting it show. His name was Deputy Chief Khalid Achebe Mensah, and he was 53 years old, 6 feet 1, 194 pounds. And he had been with the department for 31 years, the last 7 of them as Deputy Chief of Investigations, and which was the position from which, at 7:49 a.m. that morning, 2 minutes before Dukes spoke to him in the parking garage, the Chief of Police had called to tell him that the city manager had approved the appointment, and the announcement would be made at 11 a.m. He had been driving to work when the call came. He had pulled over on Mercer Street for 4 minutes, engine running, and sat with that news in the specific way a person sits with something they have worked toward for a long time, and have therefore not allowed themselves to fully imagine until the moment it is real. He had not called anyone. He had not texted anyone. He had pulled back into traffic and driven the remaining 6 blocks to the 3rd District Station, and turned into the parking garage and found Bay 11 and parked. He was wearing his dress uniform because the press conference required it, and because he had the 9 a.m. briefing on 4th floor operations that could not be moved, and because a man who had been precise about his time for 31 years did not rearrange his schedule for a press conference that was not until 11. He had ironed the uniform himself that morning at 5:20 a.m. He pressed it from the collar down, the way his mother had taught him in Lagos, moving the iron in smooth, deliberate strokes without rushing because a uniform presented incorrectly was a statement about the person wearing it. He had never been willing to make that statement. The travel mug had been a gift from his daughter Chidinma on his 50th birthday, matte black, no logo, with his initials pressed into the bottom in small letters that only he and she knew were there. He had used it every working day for 3 years and 2 months. It had been on his desk when he made the calls that closed the Heron Street case in 2020. It had been in his hand the morning he testified before the Oversight Board in 2022. It had been filled with the same black coffee, no sugar, no milk, ground from the same Ghanaian beans he ordered online in 2-pound bags every 3 weeks, every single day. He had been in the briefcase game, as his sergeant had called it back in 1998, since the day he made detective. 31 years of that briefcase game had given him one skill above all others. He could sit in a room with a person and understand, within the first 2 minutes of that person speaking, precisely what kind of problem they were, precisely what had made them that kind of problem, and precisely how much of that problem was fixable and how much was structural. He had used this skill in interrogation rooms, in deposition hearings, in internal review panels, in conversations with city council members who did not know he was managing them. He had used it in Bay 11 of the third-floor parking garage at 7:51 a.m. on a Monday morning, without changing his expression or his grip on the travel mug. He had understood Dukes in 90 seconds, not the name. He hadn't known the name yet. The type he had seen in variations across 31 years. A man whose authority has been hollowed from the inside by his own conduct, who compensates with the territorial performance of authority over whatever small spaces remain available to him. A parking bay, a registration desk, a break room microwave. The performance is never really about the space. It is about the man's relationship to what he used to have and no longer does. He had noted the name tag before he got in the elevator. Dukes. He had made a note in his phone while riding up to the 4th floor. Dukes, Bay 11. 0751. 3rd floor admin assignment. Check record. He had 6 minutes before his 9 a.m. briefing. The 3rd District Station House had been on Oleander Avenue for 22 years. It was a 6-floor building, tan brick, with a lobby that smelled of commercial cleaning product, and the particular flat-light quality of a space that sees too many people moving through it too quickly to absorb warmth. There were 31 administrative staff, 64 sworn officers currently assigned, a property room on the 2nd floor that had been cited for disorganization in 2 consecutive annual audits, and a 3rd-floor break room where the coffee machine had been broken for 6 weeks and nobody had filed the maintenance request because the officer whose responsibility it was had been on administrative detail since February and had developed a general policy of not filing anything that required effort. The commander of the 3rd District was Deputy Commander Ama Asante, 51, 18 years in the department, who had been running the 3rd District for 3 years, with the particular administrative patience required to manage a station where 16% of officers were in some stage of complaint, grievance, or review. She had a rule: no complaint that crossed her desk sat unread for more than 48 hours. The rule had nothing to do with resolution. Resolution took what it took, but she believed that the act of reading a complaint within 48 hours sent a signal that the complaint had been received by a person, rather than filed into a system, and signals mattered. She had read Dukes's file 4 times in 9 months. She knew the Roanoke Street incident. She knew the 2 prior complaints from 2019 that had been resolved administratively. Resolved being the word the department used when a complaint was closed, without finding but also without clearing, the category of outcome that sat in a record and said nothing clearly, except that something had happened and had not been fully accounted for. She had spoken to Dukes once in February, when she told him about the desk assignment, and he had received the information the way men of his type always received it, as a temporary condition applied to him by people who did not understand his value, which would be corrected when the right people noticed. She had not corrected that impression. She had said what was true. The assignment was the assignment. The conditions were the conditions. The review was ongoing, and she had let him carry whatever he wanted to carry from the conversation, because the correction was not hers to deliver. It was, as it turned out, going to be delivered by someone else entirely. If you've been feeling this story settle into something specific in your chest, stay with me, Because what Colati Achebe-Mensah does with the 6 minutes before his briefing is not what anyone watching him walk to that elevator would have predicted. He did not go to Commander Asante. He did not go to Human Resources. He did not forward his phone note to anyone or make a call or send a message. He sat down at the desk in his office on the 4th floor, opened his briefcase, took out the quarterly operation summary he needed for the 9 a.m. meeting, and reviewed it for 6 minutes. He was precise and complete in his review. He arrived at the briefing on time. The briefing ran 41 minutes. He asked 4 questions and made 2 recommendations, and closed with a clear statement of the operational priorities for the coming quarter. The people in that room, who did not yet know about the 11 a.m. press conference, registered the meeting as an effective, unremarkable Thursday morning level briefing. There was nothing in his manner that indicated the morning had contained anything except the briefing. At 9:58 a.m., he went back to his office. He closed the door. He took out his phone and opened the note he had made in the elevator. DUKES, Bay 11. 0751. 3rd floor admin assignment. Check record. He opened the internal personnel system. He pulled the record. He read it for 11 minutes. Then he picked up the phone and called Commander Asante. She answered on the first ring. He said, "I had an interaction in the parking garage this morning. Officer Dukes, Bay 11, 0751. I'd like you to pull the record and tell me what you see." She said, "I know the record." He said, "Then you know what I'm going to ask." There was a pause of 3 seconds. She said, "The Roanoke complaint is still in review. The 2 from 2019 were closed without finding." He said, "And the desk assignment?" She said, "February." He said, "Right. I'm going to ask you to prepare a summary of that record for my review. Not for action, for review. I want to see the full picture in one document before 11 a.m. She said, "I can have it to you by 10:30. He said, "Thank you." He hung up. He looked at his phone for a moment. Then he looked out the window of his 4th floor office at Oleander Avenue, at the particular morning light of a city going about its Tuesday, because it was a Tuesday, not a Monday, and the day of the week is one of the few imprecise details allowed when precision would identify a real city, a real station, a real record. He looked at the city the way a man looks at something he has been studying for a long time and is about to be given a new kind of authority over, and he let himself feel the weight of it for the remaining 41 minutes before the press conference. At 11:02 a.m., the chief of police introduced him at a podium in the station house lobby. The words were the formal ones: appointment, confirmation, effective date, 31 years of service, the gratitude of the department and the city. The officers and staff in the lobby received the announcement in the variety of ways that people receive news that reorganizes the hierarchy. Some with the specific stillness of people recalibrating, some with something that looked like relief, 1 or 2 with the expression of people doing rapid private arithmetic about the implications for their own situations. Dukes was not in the lobby. He was at his desk on the 3rd floor and learned about the announcement from a colleague at 11:17 a.m. The colleague said, "Did you know about this? Achebe-Mensah." Dukes said, "The name's familiar." The colleague said, "He's been Deputy Chief of Investigations for 7 years. They made him chief this morning." A pause. "He was in the building today. I saw him in the elevator." Dukes said nothing. He was looking at his computer screen. He was thinking about the parking garage. He was thinking about Bay 11 and 7:51 a.m., and the things he had said in the register that dropped below the level of a suggestion. And he was running the arithmetic of those things against what he had just been told. And the arithmetic was not resolving into anything comfortable. At 2:14 p.m. that afternoon, Commander Asante called him to her office. She had the summary document on her desk. She did not turn it toward him or show it to him. She placed her hands flat on the desk, and she said what needed to be said, in the language of someone who had been waiting for the correct moment to say it. She said, "The review that has been pending since February is going to be completed. I've been asked to expedite it. I want you to understand what that means, not as a threat, not as a conversation, but as an administrative statement of fact. The review will be completed. The findings will go to the chief's office. Whatever the findings are, They will be reviewed by someone who was in that garage this morning. Duke sat with that for a moment. She watched him process it, the sequence of it, the specific order of how the pieces had traveled from Bay 11 at 7:51 a.m. to her desk at 2:14 p.m. She watched him arrive at the understanding that the man in the garage had not reacted, had not raised his voice, had not corrected him or argued or made anything visible, and that the absence of reaction had not been weakness or deference. It had been precision. It had been a man deciding in 90 seconds that the correct response was not the immediate one. She had seen that quality in perhaps 4 people in 30 years of this work. It was rare not because it required exceptional intelligence, but because it required patience of a very specific kind, the patience of someone who has decided, somewhere foundational, that the record matters more than the moment, that the moment is always temporary, that the record is the only thing that holds. She said, "That's all." He left. He sat at his desk until 4:30, when his shift ended. He drove home. He sat in his car in his driveway, in the flat afternoon light of a fall Tuesday, for 17 minutes. What happened over the following 6 weeks was not dramatic in the way that the moment in the parking garage had been dramatic. It was administrative, which is to say, it was thorough, and it was slow, and it was permanent. The review found that the Roanoke Street incident warranted sustained findings on 2 of the 3 original complaint allegations. The 2 2019 complaints, reopened in light of the Roanoke findings, and reviewed together as a pattern rather than separately as incidents, produced a supplementary finding that recommended formal disciplinary action for conduct unbecoming and sustained misuse of supervisory position. The parking garage incident, documented in the new chief's phone note, time-stamped 7:53 a.m., and submitted to Commander Asante as part of the record, was not itself a formal complaint. It was an observation, submitted by an officer, logged in the file. It required no separate action. It did not need to be a formal complaint. Its function in the file was to establish the present-day context for the pattern of prior behavior, a pattern that had been waiting in pieces, in 3 separate complaint files, for someone to place them in the same document and read them as what they were. Dukes resigned on the 44th day after the announcement. He had been on the force for 16 years and 2 months. He was 43 years old. Whatever he had thought the parking bay protected, it had not protected him from the record he had built in 16 years, which was, in the end, the only record that mattered. Chief Achebe Mensah's first departmental directive, issued on his 8th day in the role, established a new protocol for the review of administratively pending complaints. No complaint in the unresolved category would sit in that category for more than 90 days without a formal disposition, not closed without finding, not cleared, not resolved, disposed of with a written finding in one direction or the other, within 90 days of filing. The directive was 3 paragraphs. It did not mention parking garages. It did not mention Dukes. It did not need to. It was a statement about how the department would work, not a statement about any specific incident, but every officer who read it understood where it had come from, not the parking garage. That was too small a beginning for too large a result. It had come from 31 years of a man who had watched how authority moved, and how accountability moved, and where the two diverged, and who had arrived on a Tuesday morning in Bay 11 of the 3rd floor parking garage, at the place where he finally had the standing to close the gap. He had noted the name. He had made the note in the elevator. He had reviewed the record. He had called Commander Asante. He had gone to the press conference, in that order, with that precision, the way he did everything. The world does not always know what it is standing in the presence of. This is the sentence that fits every story in this series, and it fits this one most precisely, because in this one the world had every available indicator. The dress uniform, the briefcase, the building, the floor, the time of morning, none of it was hidden. All of it was visible, and the man in Bay 11 looked at it and saw something else, because the picture in his mind was older than the evidence in front of him, and he had never learned, had been given 16 years of unreviewed complaints, and had never been required to update it. That is not ignorance. Ignorance can be corrected by information. What lived in Dukes in Bay 11 was something older than information, something that had been given room to grow by every complaint that had been closed without finding. by every administrative resolution that resolved nothing, by every 90-day review that quietly became a 9-month review, and then a permanent open file. The system had been the accomplice, not with intention, with inertia. 31 years of watching that inertia is what made the 3-paragraph directive possible. Not anger. Khaled Achebe-Mensah did not run on anger, had trained himself out of it in rooms where anger would have cost him everything. He ran on precision, on the understanding that a record is a record, that a pattern is a pattern, that the gap between what a department says it does and what it actually does lives in the distance between a complaint filed and a complaint disposed. He had been closing that gap for 31 years, one case at a time, with a travel mug in his right hand and a briefcase in his left, and a phone note made in an elevator. You cannot threaten what a man has already decided to do with his life. Bay 11 was not a threat to Khaled Achebe-Mensah. It was a data point. He collected it the way he collected everything, carefully, completely, and with the full intention of using it. Some things take 31 years to build. The building is the story, not the press conference, not the parking garage, not the directive, the 31 years. The case is closed and the testimony given, and the department reformed one protocol at a time, by a man who understood that the only authority that holds is the authority built on a record nobody can dispute. He pressed his uniform the night before. He filled his travel mug in the morning. He drove to work. He parked in Bay 11 because it was the closest space to the elevator. And he had a 9 a.m. briefing and he was precise about his time. The rest of it was just what the record said. Here is the question I want you to sit with. If you had spent 31 years building something that could not be taken from you, and on the morning it was formally recognized, someone tried to diminish it in a parking garage, would you correct them in that moment? Or would you wait until you had the standing to correct the whole system that made them possible? Leave your answer in the comments. I want to read it. Subscribe for more stories about hidden strength, quiet power, and the people the world overlooks until they change everything. I'll see you in the next one.